Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Almost Awakened podcast. I'm Bill Reel.
And I'm Teresa Hobbs.
And we're grateful for the chance to sit down with you today. Today, we're going to talk about shame. And we've got a bunch of different unhealthy behaviors. So recently, we've gone into fragilization. We've gone into boundaries. We've done a couple of others that are unhealthy things that religious systems do, that unhealthy family systems do. And today we're going to talk about shame. So I'm going to put this up on the screen. Here's a picture of some man feeling shame with the stamp of shame all along his arm. He looks really sad. Shame can make us sad. And I got the slideshow here up. What I wanted to point to start us off with, we're always trying to start off with some working definition. Shame as control, how unhealthy people and systems keep you small. This episode will explore how shame is used as a tool of manipulation, particularly in religious environments, but also in family systems and personal relationships. And we're going to walk listeners through what shame is, how it gets weaponized, what damage it does, and how to reclaim sovereignty from it. And I'll even add, we even have a slide on moments where maybe shame is even good and helpful and beneficial to society. So with that, the working definition, we need to define shame because its close cousin is guilt. And I've done conversations around this before, but there are often something that is honorable or good in terms of how it's utilized in society. And then there's often these cousins of things that are very similar, can be confused for the thing, but are often used to hurt people or marginalize people or make people feel less than. And shame and guilt are these two words. And so guilt is this idea that I did something bad, and shame is the idea that I am bad. Guilt can be useful and adaptive as it points to misalignment with values. And, we all need to feel internally, we need to feel some guilt sometimes for our behaviors. We need to recognize I can't believe I did that. I did this thing and it hurt someone. And I want to show up better than that. And it didn't represent the values that I hold. When we contrast that with shame, though, which targets identity and often leads to hiding, disconnection, and self-loathing. Brené Brown, famous, I want to say psychologist, but social scientist, studying various things like vulnerability, shame being one of the other topics that she covers a bunch. She says it succinctly. She says, guilt says I did something bad. Shame says I am bad. I'll just ask you here on the onset, Teresa, are there any thoughts that you've got immediately about shame and guilt, or any general ideas about the two and within society?
Yes. So Brené's work was so instrumental for me. I remember when her stuff came out, and it was the first person I'd ever heard who even spoke the word shame. And I just remember having this inner knowing that was like, I need to pay attention to this because it was so woven throughout my early life, especially while I was in Mormonism. And then it just permeated the rest of my life. And so her work was incredibly helpful to guide me to understand the difference between that guilt versus shame, because shame is corrosive and it will eat away at you, and it drives you. Like, shame's another interesting thing in that it's, when you compare nervous system states, shame is akin to the dorsal shutdown state. So shame is like this place where we want to hide, we shut down, we our energy dissipates. It's a really I'm trying to think of the right word to describe it, but it's a very dark emotion, a very heavy emotion, and it's a very disempowering emotion. That's, I think, what I was looking for.
Yeah, shame. I was just thinking about this. I can't remember what it was. You and I were in a conversation, and you didn't do anything wrong in this moment, but you said something to me, and I remember feeling shame about it, and it caused me to avoid just dealing with the conversation with you. And I think shame does that. Anytime we feel shame in a conflict, in being criticized, in a conversation, where we're trying to fit in and be part of a group, it will cause us to make excuses for our behavior rather than just deal with things. And we'll get to that later. There's a quote somewhere in this slideshow that speaks to the idea that if you just have the courage to speak out loud directly about your shame, it actually makes it go away. And I remember in the moment that I was having with you, I felt that. I knew what my brain was telling me to handle it like, and I just said something to you that just addressed the shame out loud. And then, of course, as long as you've got a reasonable, healthy person across from you, at least moderately, they're going to let you off the hook and meet you where you are. And you did in that instance, by the way. But I remember just noting, and again, I wasn't even thinking about this topic today, but I remember noting at the moment going, I felt the impetus to handle this the way most of us do when we feel shame. Of course, I'm not going to do that here because I've got the wherewithal and I know what's going on. So I didn't. Now, of course, sometimes I get caught off guard and I absolutely still behave in my shame. But in this instance, I was self-aware of how shame works, and I addressed it head on. And of course, right then it went away. I want to note this quote here. This is from Sarah Rule, and I'm not familiar with her, but I saw the quote and I loved it. It says, "Shame is an odd emotion. It clings to things over which we have no control, like a scent. We don't have control over lots of parts of us, whether we're too tall or too short, whether our brand of human has a unique smell to it, whether our voice cracked or we accidentally burped, whether our genitals are too big or too small. We have all these weird things that we get inside our head about, and we can't do a damn thing about them. And yet we are constantly either inside our heads, saying it under our breath, or we're saying it out loud, but we're often just apologizing or feeling horrible about the things that we can't even control.
Yeah. And it's interesting because, talking about that how shame affects you in that way, I've experienced this, and I don't know how many people might relate, but like if I've had weight gain, for example, there's been this underlying belief in my brain that says I can't show up in the world. Like I cannot be seen if I have extra weight, or if there's something different about my appearance. It's almost like I have to count myself out. I have to just go in the corner and hide away and never be seen again. And that's what shame does to you. It completely shuts you down. It makes you feel like you aren't worthy enough to be seen and in the world, be seen by others. It's really interesting.
Yeah, and it is part of our the social cues we get, the social cues we give, the effort going back thousands and thousands, maybe tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years, in wanting to fit in with our tribe, not wanting to be out of place. Even if you think about it this way, I mean, if you watch a National Geographic film and you watch the leopard on the prowl, and it's going over to the, I don't know, I'm going to wildebeest herd, whatever it is, and the leopard is trying to find the one that's out of place. It's trying to find the one that's too old or too young, that's too slow. It's looking for the thing that is different because that's going to be the easier catch for it. It doesn't want to look for the one that fits in looking like all the others. And so we are programmed for safety to seek this fitting in. And when somebody points out, especially if it comes with humor, laughing at us, if someone points out how we're different, we just naturally feel stuff about that. And as we just said, it's about things that maybe we can't even help. I wanted to note the psychological impacts of both guilt and shame because they are different. Guilt in healthy doses can motivate growth. It pushes us to reflect, to make amends, to avoid repeating mistakes. But when guilt lingers or becomes excessive, it turns toxic. Chronic guilt leads to anxiety, depression, low self-worth, and even physical symptoms like insomnia and headaches. When I read that sentence, I thought of you because you are in this field of coaching where you specialize in helping people with chronic symptoms. And I'm since starting a relationship with you and learning about what it is that you do in the world, I now catch these moments where something is said that we all agree with, where the behaviors of society cause people to feel things so significant that it shows up as symptoms. And I just want to give you a second to say anything you want to, but what I'm noticing is that um, people ought to all pause and just at least consider, whether it's in their own life or someone they love out there, how unresolved issues that have to do with interpersonal relationships and how we treat each other are showing up in human beings as symptoms, sometimes so severe that they cause people to collapse and to have to endure the extremes of chronic fatigue or chronic pain.
Yeah. So there's a couple ways that this can show up or present for people. So one is if we are shame avoidant, right? We want to avoid shame at all costs, then we might try to manage things outside of us to avoid the feeling of shame, which means we might become stuck in fight or flight in that sympathetic drive to like fix things and manage things and make sure everything's perfect. This is where perfectionism comes from. This is where OCD comes from. It's this thing that we're doing to sort of control and manage the unbearable feelings of shame or unworthiness inside. And then on the opposite side of that, when we get to a place where we just, our system just can't, it can't manage that anymore. Like there's no way that it feels like there's no hope. And so you get stuck in the shutdown phase, which is just, I am bad, I am wrong. You lose energy. You can be in what they call the dorsal state. And that in and of itself also drives certain types of symptoms, especially fatigue. Like that's where you get a lot of fatigue, depression, but where you get a lot of like anxiety or panic or OCD is when you're in that avoidance place where you're trying so hard to manage it and you're running from it. You're trying like hell to just avoid feeling shame. And yeah, so you can either be like wallowing in it or trying to run from it.
Yeah, and here we were talking about the physiological impacts of guilt, but when it mentions chronic guilt, I think you're right. I think chronic guilt is tied to something else. Again, guilt on its own is this idea that something went wrong, I didn't do something right, and I can start today, I can correct the behavior, I can do something different.
Yeah.
Whereas shame is about who you are. You can't help but show up the way you are. And so chronic guilt is this idea to me that there's something out there that you feel guilty about that you just can't change. And
Yeah.
I'll give an extreme example. You and I have been watching documentaries recently on serial killers, which has been an interesting little ride for the last week or so. Ted Bundy, John Wayne Gacy. We're waiting for the new Netflix one about a female serial killer to come out. But if something happens to someone's child, their child, again, kidnapped, whatever, the horrendous things that happen at times, the parents are feeling chronic guilt for sure. But really, they didn't do anything wrong. They couldn't control the situation. Some other human who's unhealthy stepped in. And I can't help but at least wonder that really we're not talking about guilt in this situation. We're talking about them feeling the shame of thinking they could have done something different. Not that they actually could have done something different. And so I think when guilt turns into shame, when guilt becomes chronic, and I think it is connected to shame when that happens, as you're pointing out, and I'm saying here, it can lead to anxiety, depression, low self-worth, even physical symptoms like insomnia or headaches, or worse, as you pointed out. When left unresolved, guilt can spiral into self-criticism or fuel disorders like OCD, which you mentioned as well. The key is recognizing guilt early and working through it before it stops being a teacher and starts being a tormentor. And I think that's an interesting thing too. The word tormentor has caught my eye over the last few years as well. One of the things that we do is that when we partner up with somebody, you and I are in a relationship, and I can't remember where I saw this. It was either in parts work or somewhere else, but that people who we care about and trust and value what they have to say, they can become a tormentor to us, that they bump into us and there's conflict and it stretches us and pushes us and at times is abrasive to us, but they're not tormenting us. Their differences are mentoring us, that they're opportunities to feel things, sit with things, be present with things, process things, and grow from them. And but in this instance, we're talking about something going too far, that guilt, or in some instances, shame, when it becomes chronic guilt, can become a tormentor. And you simply just live with these ill feelings of wishing you could have done something different. And it
Yeah.
stops being a teacher when you can just change, you can just learn from it and then try a new behavior, break old habits, and become someone who does something differently.
Well, I want to tie this into, is there a section on religion?
Yeah.
Or
Yep.
okay, maybe I'll keep this for then.
Okay. Psychological impacts of shame. Shame, unlike guilt, doesn't just target our actions. It attacks our identity. It's the deep, painful feeling that we are flawed at our core, that we're unworthy of love, connection, or belonging. While guilt says, I did something bad, again, Brené Brown, shame whispers, I am bad. Left unchecked, shame breeds low self-worth, social withdrawal, desperate need to hide. We all have felt that before. It often spirals into anxiety, depression, eating disorders, and a life of emotional isolation. So many people, whatever the things are they feel shame about, they will shape their life so as to avoid putting themselves in any space where they would have to feel that shame, even if the chance of that shame is less than 1%. People will run away from it. So people stuck in shame don't just feel bad, they feel broken. Healing shame requires compassion, not condemnation. Goes back again, I think of the thought of, instead of asking, why did you do that? It's the Oprah Winfrey, Bruce Perry book of What Happened to You. Healing shame requires compassion, not condemnation. Compassion is what happened to you. Condemnation is why did you do that? Therapy, self-compassion work, and safe relationships can help break that toxic loop and rebuild a sense of inherent worth. Shame loses its grip when we stop running from it and start speaking it out loud in spaces where we're met with empathy instead of judgment. Any thoughts on that one? Otherwise, I'll move on to the shame cycle and we can chat about that.
Yep, let's just keep going.
Okay. Have you ever been in the shame cycle before?
Yes, for sure.
And I would think with the audience, all of us have. We've all been at this. At some point, there's a trigger. Something happens. We feel embarrassed. We feel awkward. Somebody's making fun of us. They're laughing at us instead of laughing with us. And the trigger happens. So then we get the thoughts inside our head, the shaming self-talk. And that causes us to have emotional dysregulation. So then we leave the ventral state of our brain, the logical, reasonable part of our head, and we enter that lizard brain. We go into either fight or flight or freeze or fawn, because we're trying to get out of feeling the shame and specifically the dysregulation that comes with it. So then we turn to some sort of destructive behavior, and destructive behavior doesn't necessarily have to be damaging visibly. It can be self-loathing thoughts. It can be disconnection from people who love and care about us. It can be any kind of behavior that is destructive to our connection to others and to ourselves. Eventually, do you want to say something there?
Well, I was just gonna give an example of being in this shame cycle. It happened recently. You and I were having a conversation, and we were talking about boundaries. I think it was after our podcast on boundaries, and I had mentioned something that I did in the past, and I felt justified in why I did it. It was some way I crossed a boundary, and you were like, no, no, that's not okay. And I got really upset, because I'm like, well, of course it justifies it, but then as you were sharing it with me, I really got the message, like, yeah, that really wasn't okay. But I didn't want to sit with that. Like, it was so uncomfortable So I kept fighting against it and sort of pushing against you. And then I recognized after that that I was feeling really disconnected from you. I was kind of pulling away. So yeah. And as soon as I was able to say it, like as soon as we were able to have the conversation, I could talk about it, then my system sort of calmed down. So
Yeah. In those moments, I mean, I can think of these too. In those moments, I feel judgment, even if there isn't. Like in this situation that you're talking about, I was sort of chuckling at you, like, come on, like, really? Is that really a healthy way to, and so you felt shame and you handled the conversation the way you did, and it didn't last long. You came around and said, on some level, yeah, I was trying to justify my behavior. I've done that a lot. And when it happens, um I feel a lot of things that have me put walls up, and it doesn't matter if somebody is speaking truth to the situation. I want to avoid that. And the reality is, at least in like these moments, I don't really have any judgment for you. You're just being human like I'm being human. And what you point to is the moment this gets back to being normal, which is going from that destructive behaviors to returning to a calm state. It requires us, as you said, to confront the shame we're feeling and to just sit with it and not let it be the reasoning for why we show up the way we do. I don't think it's a simple thing either. I would guess on issues like this, and I can think of others, but in issues like this, that 95% of us, 98% of us struggle with showing up immediately in a responsible, healthy way, because shame is a deeply powerful feeling. Any other thoughts you have there?
no, I agree with all of that. I think it's fascinating to just see how it plays out, even when you think you've worked on it, or you know what I mean. It's a very human thing. And I will say again, like the faster you can get to just speaking it out loud and disconnecting it from, rather than feeling like it's like engulfing you, if you can just say, "Wow, I'm feeling a lot of shame around this." Just that statement alone helps to sort of separate it from who you think you are and gives it space to move. And then you can sort of address that with the safe person that you're with and work with it in a better way. So,
This is one of the values that I think, you and I are coaches. This is one of the values I think coaching has for people. When a coach is really deeply aware of these human mechanisms, what causes them, how they spin out of control, and how we can help people to regulate. What interests me when I look at this is that at every one of these transitions, you could shorten the time that thing is happening, and you could prevent the next step from occurring. So, for instance, when you're triggered, there are people who are so grounded, so self-aware, they spent time meditating, whatever it is, they've gotten to the point that when certain triggers happen, they can immediately recognize it right then and prevent it from leading into any sort of deep shaming self-talk, right? And then other folks can stop it at the shaming self-talk before it gets too deeply into emotional dysregulation. And you can stop it at the emotional dysregulation and keep it from getting to destructive behaviors. And the secret is that any moment you confront what you're feeling, presence it, be aware of it, and have the tools to slow down and get back into that standard state of mind, you can exit any one of these negative moments and get right back to a return to a calm state. And anyway, I just note for folks, if you find yourself, look, again, things have happened to you. Those things have been horrible and shitty at times. We've all had horrible things happen to us. We all feel these kinds of human emotions that drag us into destructive behaviors and emotional dysregulation. But it really is learning the tools, having the resources that allow us to exit this shame cycle, get back to a calm state as soon as possible, where we're going to be the happiest, most content, and the most productive. So there's that. Okay. So here's the shame in religious systems. Do you want to say anything here? Do you want me to get a slide or two in?
get a slide or two in. Yep.
All right. So shame in religious systems. Shame is used to police behavior, especially sexuality and purity culture. doubt and disobedience, and roles related to gender, authority, and worthiness. And I don't know how to articulate this, but unhealthy religions use all the tools at their disposal to manipulate us. And it's interesting when we notice what the broad, general, overarching categories for this are. Why would a religious system want to shame us around doubt and disobedience? Well, because it doesn't want us challenging the system. Why would the system shame us in regards to roles related to gender, authority, and worthiness? Because the system is a hierarchy and it doesn't want us challenging the system. But I always find that sexuality and purity culture are interesting because most unhealthy religions have very strict rules around sexuality and purity culture. I don't know that in and of itself it has anything to do with not challenging the system. The system could have space for sexual openness. In fact, a lot of high demand, unhealthy systems actually have very open sexual cultures. I find that one interesting because I think there's something else going on there, and I think that's something that'll be worth exploring maybe in a later episode. I'll also say, please.
Can I touch on that?
Oh, anything. Absolutely.
Just for a second, because as you're saying that, what it reminded me of is like it's like a shackle in a way, or I'm thinking of like a wounded bird, like okay, chickens, for example. There are some chickens that can have the ability to fly or fly out of their coop. And so you cut their wings, like you cut the feathers on the wings. So there's a term for it. So they can't get out. And I feel like the shame around sexuality and purity culture, it's an actual wound. Like it keeps a person so focused on themselves that they can't pay attention to anything else out there. Yeah, I think it's an effective tool to sort of keep a person in a cage, basically.
Yeah. And I will add, the thing I want to explore with that one, sexuality and purity culture, is that often the founder or the leaders within a high demand system want the privilege of having greater access to sexuality than the underlings in the system have. And by creating rules around sexuality and purity culture, you get to be the gatekeeper. And by being the gatekeeper, you create a space where you can more strongly manipulate people into, again, being able to take advantage of that privilege and be the gatekeeper that has access to greater sexuality than everyone else. So I'll just note that. I think that's worth exploring at some point. Jonathan Haidt, a well-known social scientist, I've explored him in the past in regards to things like elevation emotion, which his definition matches very closely with, for example, Mormonism's idea of the Holy Ghost. But Jonathan Haidt is a social scientist studying how humans react in social situations. And he notes that angry gods make shame more effective as a means of social control. And I don't think he's acknowledging that gods are angry and that they're real. What he's pointing to is that unhealthy religious and spiritual systems that take deep advantage of shame in order to control and manipulate people often do so in the context of, at least in those moments, having their gods be perceived as angry or vindictive. And so it shows up that way. Okay. Next up here, we can go through this pretty quickly, but these are examples of how unhealthy religious systems use shame as a tool for control. And there's 10 of them. I'll go through them really quick. Shame around doubt, framed as weakness. So when the population of a unhealthy religious system, when they are collectively taught that doubt is a weakness, then if you begin to figure out that your religion might not be true, you now sense that you can't say anything out loud because the authorities of the tribe or even the other members of that religious system are going to frame you as weak, broken, less than. Number 2, service as a worthiness meter. If you don't accept a calling or worse, ask to be released. So for instance, in Mormonism, it's a lay ministry. People in the congregation are given responsibilities and they are taught explicitly that they are not to say no to callings. And so if you don't feel up to the task and you don't think it's in your best interest to take that calling, you're going to have to risk feeling shame for saying no. Number 3, educational or intellectual ambition is pride. Mormonism and other systems. By the way, every one of these has Mormonism as a main example, but underneath you'll see a parallel in another system where they do something similar. Education or intellectual ambition as pride. There have been instances in Mormonism where the leaders have noted that the enemy of all the list of kinds of enemies that the religious system has, one of those enemies is quote unquote so-called intellectuals. And so that being intelligent, being logical, rational, intelligent, informed, those things are sometimes labeled as being a bad thing. Being prideful, for instance, rather than just being the person in the room who has the most information and can explain the data point clearly. Number 4, public testimony meetings as shame theater. You're subtly expected to bear your testimony regularly. If you don't, others might see it as a sign that you're struggling spiritually. So in Mormonism, every month, there's this opportunity for everybody in the congregation to share their testimony. And if you don't like public speaking, you don't like to stand up there, you don't feel good about doing that, if you go a whole year of not sharing your testimony, members notice that. And you're seen as someone who maybe doesn't have a testimony or doesn't have the strength to stand up and say it. So number 5, shaming emotions that don't match the narrative. So expressing anger, grief, bitterness, such like having a faith crisis, for instance, or experiencing a death in a family is often seen as a lack of faith in God's plan. Mormonism, for instance, has a scripture and a teaching that says contention is of the devil. And so one can never push back against the system, even in the healthiest of ways, without being seen as being contentious. So there's that. In the next one here, the last 5, tithing as a loyalty test. So those who don't pay a full tithe are deemed unworthy. They can't go to the temple. Hence, there's shame sitting there in tons of teachings for them. Spiritual superiority through dietary shame. So, if the guy in the ward who has an occasional alcoholic beverage from time to time, if somebody's drinking coffee or tea in Mormonism, systems that have dietary restrictions, if you're not keeping that 100%, the system says something is less than about you. And so again, an opportunity to feel shame. Chosen or elect narratives that shame the outsider. So the insiders all talk about how they've been saved for the last days. They're the chosen. They're the very elect. And what that means is that the neighbor across the street who isn't a member of that system is something less than and is able to be deemed to feel shame for that. So there's that. Number 9 here is shaming mental health struggles or as sin or weakness. I can just, there's so many times when I was in the church that the overarching idea was that everyone should have the ability to just pull themselves up by their bootstraps and get shit done. And there was no tolerance because I wasn't dealing with depression, then you don't need to deal with depression. You shouldn't have to deal with it. I choose not to be depressed, so you should be able to just choose not to be depressed. And there's no allowance for people to be different from each other and for some people to feel negative emotions, any type of negative emotion, especially if it was long lasting or consistent or reoccurring. The systems often labeled those as people not strong enough, people who lacked faith. If you had faith, you could pray, it would go away. If you had faith, you could get a blessing and it would go away. And then number 10, sexual shame framed as protection of others. Women are taught to dress modestly so they don't tempt men, placing the burden of male arousal on female shame. Do you have any thoughts on any of these 10?
All of them almost. No. They're just so fascinating because I see so much of this in Mormonism in particular. And if you can go back to the first slide. So sorry. The public testimony one, that's a big one. And I shared the story before about how I was at a girls' camp and, we were all around the fire and everybody was sharing the testimony and they were all expecting me to do it. And so I got double shamed. I was terrified to do it because I was afraid I was going to mess up and I would be publicly shamed for not following the protocol the right way. And then I was shamed for not doing it. So that was sort of a double-edged sword. The whole shaming emotions that don't match the narrative. Yeah, it's interesting. Like I was thinking about how Mormons, they do a lot of, it says here that like Buddhists tend to do spiritual bypassing, but I think Mormons do too. And when somebody dies, I don't know how many Mormons I've seen that have like expressed, I don't know, almost a little bit of a reverence around it. Not reverence, but like, oh, we're going to be so happy when we can be with them again. Like, it's almost like there's no normalization of the deep loss of somebody because we're so happy that we're going to see him in the next life. It's such an interesting thing. I don't know if you've noticed that in Mormonism, but I see that in Mormonism more than other faiths. And then let's see. Oh, there was another thing. So the shaming the outsider. This was a big one for me as well growing up because my dad wasn't active and he smoked and he drank a little bit of alcohol. And I had internalized shame because of him sort of being the outsider because he did all the bad things. He didn't keep the word of wisdom, whatever. And so that sort of bled into my own identity. And then, of course, the sexual shame, being framed as protection for others. That's been put on women for so long, as women are the gatekeepers of men's desire. And I just think that that's kind of gross, but yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, it is. And back to the, when you talk about like grief, yeah, there's this idea that you don't have a good reason to be sad. The gospel takes care of all of that. And so your sadness on some level is just a sign of a lack of faith. And as you point out, it's so normal. Like you've experienced loss. You're not going to see that person again at the very minimum for the rest of this life. And if you have a loved one that you've lost, I lost my mom. She was 59 years old to cancer. And that was a horrific loss. I couldn't help but feel grief and be sad. I wasn't going to see my mom again in this life at the very minimum. And I know believers will have a certainty about what lays on the other side, but for those of us who don't have that certainty, we also feel like it's likely we'll never see that person again. And hence I'll never get to see my mom or get to enjoy her company or get to laugh with her or to talk with her. And the grief over that is a normal human expression and feeling. And it's weird how we make people feel guilt for feeling normal things.
Yeah, and there are other spiritual modalities that shame, quote unquote negative emotions. A lot of the new age sort of beliefs are all about like, good vibes only, or I don't know. That stuff is kind of tacky to me.
Good vibes only does tell everybody up front, don't come to this space unless you can only have the best of feelings here.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. And then before we jump into families and relationships, let me put something else up here on the screen. We wanted to talk for just a moment about how the coaching is going. And so I'm going to take that off, put this up. Folks, you can go to awakenandthrive.org. That is the website that Teresa and I have ourselves listed as coaches on. And we just started our support group. We had our first support group this past Tuesday. I thought it went really well. Anything you want to say about that?
No, I'm just really excited to to start this, and I wanted to let people know that we wanted to cap the support group at 15, but we were also wanted to keep the possibility open of creating a second one if there was more interest. And so we have a waiting list for that, and we have some people that are already on the waiting list. When we get enough people to warrant a second group, we'll reach out to those people who are interested, and we'll coordinate a new time to meet for that one. So if you are interested, you can go to the same thing. It just says support groups, and it will take you to a link that you can click on to add your name to the waitlist.
Yep. And in fact, when you go to awakenandthrive.org, this is what you'll see. You'll see this screen right here, and right there on the bottom left on the screen. But of course, the website does go further and further down, so you can scroll down. But this is the top section. On that left there, it says support groups, and click to join support group. If you click that, that's the page that Teresa's talking about, and you'll get yourself added to the wait list there. And I don't think this will go long. My hunch is that within about a month, we'll have the second support group up and running. It's only $60 a month, and that gets you the ability to attend 2 support groups each month. And I think we are off and rolling with the first one, and looking forward to folks that might want to join or need that support group to be part of that second group that we'll put together here in the short future. So that is happening. And then if you click that middle one-on-one coaching, if you click that, you'll go to a screen that looks something like the little box here to the right, where you can see what it is that I and Teresa specialize in, see which one of us is going to be most helpful to your needs. We'd really love to be available as coaches for one-on-one support for those who need it. And so I'll just note that as well. And then this is the page you should find when you click the support group. And again, if you scroll to the bottom, you'll be able to join the waiting list for that. And then the last thing, we mentioned this in our last episode, but in order to keep the strictly Mormon stuff off to the one side, and to keep what I would consider sort of self-help that we are trying to provide here, and information that helps people that follow the Almost Awakened podcast have a richer, more productive second half of life, to have the tools and resources to grow, we are slowly moving everything from the Almost Awakened podcast over to the Almost Awakened podcast YouTube channel. If all of you who are fans of this show, if you would just pause this for just a moment, go over to the YouTube channels and do a little search, and click a search for Almost Awakened podcast. Find the channel itself, not the episodes, but the channel itself. Click that, and if you'll subscribe, that would be a big help to us. Last week we had 3 people. Now we've got 14. I'm hoping that we can get up to 1,000 people in a short while. And then once we do, I think we'll find that the Almost Awakened content is put here exclusively. And so we hope that you'll help us in making that happen by going over there and hitting the subscribe button. All right, I'm going to take, I don't think there's anything else. Nope, I'm going to take this off, put that one back up. All right, shame in families and relationships. So sort of the same thing, but often the motivation is slightly different, or the ways that it shows up are slightly different. In a family, an unhealthy family system, or an unhealthy one-on-one relationship, unspoken rules of dysfunction. So family rules might be don't speak, don't feel, don't challenge. And I can think of times as a young father, I was not healthy, and I sometimes did have these outward behaviors that I utilized to keep a degree of control in the home. And I didn't say these things directly, but I can definitely see how the things I did say led to conveying the concept of don't speak, don't feel, don't challenge. Another one is you're selfish if you set boundaries. You're bad if you upset me. Common shame-based messages. You're too sensitive. Why can't you be more like your brother? More like your sister? More like your cousins? You always ruin everything. These are the ways that unhealthy parents, unhealthy grandparents, unhealthy aunts and uncles, how they get those in the family to conform to not raise criticisms, to not show up in ways that are disruptive to the person who's saying it. Do you have any thoughts? Because those are, I mean, I bet almost all of us in some shape or fashion have someone in our family history who operated using things this way.
Yeah, I think so many people show up this way. This is like this is what happens when you do conditional parenting, where you reward for the good behavior and punish for the negative behavior. And if that goes too far, I think your kids are going to internalize that I'm good, I'm bad. Right? They internalize it as shame. I have a lot of sensitivity around this, and it's funny because you'll say things to the dog, to Teddy, that I that I have reactions to. And one of them is, be a good boy. I hate that phrase. I hate the term, be a good girl, be a good boy, because the opposite of that is if you're not being a good boy or a good girl, then you are being a bad boy or a bad girl. And that's about you, not the behavior. So again, when you're parenting or when you're sort of giving feedback, I think it's super important to be able to say, hey, this thing that's happening here is the problem, not you. But often we will just tell a child that they're being bad. Quit being bad, you know what I mean? Like, and that's internalized as I'm wrong, I'm bad. That's the whole foundation of shame. And unfortunately, this is how I was raised. And I don't think my parents had any other model. They wouldn't have known any different. And I'm not angry at my parents for that, but I definitely have a shame problem. And I can tell that their generation has a shame problem because on one side of the family, everybody in the family is speaks a certain way and reacts a certain way, and it all traces back to shame. So it's really interesting to me. Yeah, and also, shame's a really good way when you're an overwhelmed parent to just get your kids to shut up. It's effective, it really is. But it's only effective short term. I think then it has long-term problems that happen because of that. So I get it, it's normal. I think so many people do it because it happened to them. But, just to start being mindful of the language that you use, can be helpful to kind of see the patterns there.
When you mentioned Teddy, I
Poor Teddy.
my first thought, I wanted to joke with you and go, Teddy doesn't know English. Teddy doesn't know what good boy or bad boy is as words or stories. He just knows tone and inflection and all of that. But then I thought too, then I started smiling as you were chatting, and it wasn't because what you were saying was funny. What you were saying was very serious. But also, we will have these psychological conversations with Teddy. We know he doesn't get it. He's a dog. He doesn't know what we're saying to him. But when he does misbehave, you and I will almost act like therapists, and we'll tell Teddy, Teddy, that behavior is really unhealthy and you're going to affect other people in the home. And we'll carry on these conversations with Ted as if he can understand what we're saying when he can't, and we'll chuckle at it. But yes, when we're dealing with human beings specifically, the way that we talk to them is going to impact how they feel about themselves. It's going to impact the narratives they make about who they are and what their life means, how to interpret their life experiences. And as you point out, a lot of us, when we needed to get control of a situation and it wasn't going the way we wanted it to, a lot of us at one time or another have resorted to this kind of behavior in order to get control of the situation again, in order to get others to do or be what we needed them to be in that moment so we could stop feeling disrupted. But we are running the risk and often are causing deep harm. It said here, emotional manipulation is shame in a velvet glove. I've been around people who their tone is nice, like they say it nicely. They say it in a way that they could almost pat you on the head and as they're telling you the thing. But just because you shape it in a way that it feels like a velvet glove, if it still is coming from an unhealthy place, it still is doing harm. And then lastly, for the audience, how has this showed up in your lives? I mean, we've talked a little bit about how it showed up at ours. How has it shown up in yours? And my 2 cents is we'd love to see your comments. And so leave a comment in the chat, in the comments down below. And not only will you let us know other examples that we didn't mention in today's episode, but you're also leaving your experience behind for others to connect to. And I think often when we feel things around how others treated us unhealthy, seeing that others had similar experiences can be really helpful and validating. And so leave your comment, help us connect, help us understand how this was utilized. So thank you for doing that, folks. Why shame works. Shame activates the primal fear of disconnection. We talked about this earlier. We need to belong. We need to fit in. We are a social species. Shame activates the primal fear of disconnection. Disconnection is akin to not surviving.
That's being ousted from the tribe, right? And that's, I think, why people, when they do feel shame, they want to make themselves smaller. Like, please, I'll do better. Please don't kick me out of the tribe. It's kind of like, let's make myself invisible so that I don't get the repercussions of being ousted from this safety.
Yeah, and if your belonging is conditional, shame becomes the currency.
Mm.
People who feel shame are easier to control. They're less likely to rebel or ask questions. They're more likely to self-censor. They're easier to isolate and label as the problem. And the quote here that caught my eye was, "If I can make you ashamed of yourself, I never have to control you. You'll do it for me." And I thought that was interesting. There are so many moments where if a group or a system can make you feel shame, you will self-censor yourself. You will disconnect yourself from rebellion. And by rebellion, I don't mean real rebellion. I mean rebellion to the system of questioning. The system can get you to shut up without actually saying shut up.
Yes, and that's exactly what I was trying to illustrate when we were talking about why do religious systems often have a thing around sexuality and purity culture. Because if you can get someone to feel shameful about such a normal human thing, a normal human drive that everybody has and that comes online at a certain age, guess what? You have control over them.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, this next one here, the damage it does. And so internalized shame leads to anxiety. I think we've all felt that. If we just stop for a moment, if we just think of a time or two that we felt immense amounts of shame, and then think about other moments. So that thing happened long ago. And now if you think about the present, what kind of interactions, experiences, people do you stay away from so that you never have to even get close to that experience from long ago when you were susceptible to shame? And so I think we can all connect with the anxiety that causes, depression, addiction, codependency, chronic people pleasing or perfectionism, fear of authenticity and vulnerability. For me, that was a big one. I didn't want to feel shame. I did not want to feel like I didn't belong in the group. So I just chose to put on the mask that the group asked me to wear. And I stayed away from being my authentic self and from being vulnerable. In religious trauma, spiritual obsessive compulsive disorder, so OCD, but with a spiritual component to it. I'm thinking of people who keep the rules simply for the reason so as to not feel othered by the authorities in the tribe, and that shows up in lots of ways. Disembodiment, distrust of self. I've heard people respond to questions in that way as well, talking about how they don't trust themselves, that they'd rather have the leaders lay out the rules because they don't trust themselves to keep the rules, because somewhere along the way they didn't keep a rule and they were made to feel things about that. Shame becomes a lens through which the person sees themselves and the world. I'm always one mistake away from being unlovable. And I think religion makes us at times feel like there's no chance we could make it. And then you get so obsessed with keeping every rule. I forget what it's called. Somebody will know it. Somebody will put it in the comments, but it's the feeling that you're not, even the little things you're not getting right, and there's this over need to correct, to confess the little things, and to
Scrupulosity or
yes. Yep. So I
yeah.
think in some way scrupulosity can be one manifestation of this, where I'm always one mistake away from being unlovable.
Yeah. Well, I want to share a story just regarding the damage that it does. I deconstructed from, well, I wouldn't even say deconstructed. I'm still deconstructing as of today, but I left Mormonism when I was 20 years old. But the damage that I experienced from that church happened in my teens. Like there was an experience I went through that I explained through the lens of Mormonism. That was my only way to sort of understand it. And that lens caused me to have such a toxic interpretation of the thing that happened to me that I was, the only way I could sort of function in life was to develop all kinds of strange maladaptive coping mechanisms like OCD. So that just kind of came out of nowhere. I had obsessive compulsive disorder. I had panic attacks. I had anxiety. I had dissociation. I I can't even tell you how much of my life I spent living in utter fear of annihilation, just constantly thinking about, which kingdom am I going to end up in, and mostly thinking that I was probably going to end up in outer darkness. And for those of you who don't know what that means in the Mormon faith, it's their version of hell. Essentially, there's like three tiers of I don't know, what do they call it? Three tiers of
Well, there's like 3 tiers of heaven.
yeah,
And then
heaven.
if you don't get to heaven, then you're in outer darkness, and that's where Satan and his minions are all at.
Yeah. So for me, that's all I could think about, and it was just so unhealthy. I sometimes don't understand how I made it through that time. And looking back, sometimes I'm like, well, man, I should have been committed at some point because I was just like the thoughts that were going through my head were so crazy. And it was all based on this lens that I saw myself through from this Mormon religion that had all these very strict and rigid rules and interpretations about what things meant, and therefore what, who I was and where I was going to end up and what I was worthy of and my value. All of it was just so layered and uh, very unhealthy. And it wasn't until, I turned 20 that I finally realized that maybe I didn't have to keep myself in that toxic stew. I realized that it was helpful for some people, but it was really very unhealthy for me. So yeah. And even years after that, it wasn't like, that's when I sort of took myself out of the system. But even now I'm still unwinding things that I carry from that worldview or, you know, um, yeah. Anyway, it's it long enduring ramifications, is all I'm going to say about that.
Yeah. Um, it is impressive, and I don't mean that in a good way. It's impressive how many things affect us human beings, especially when we're younger. And almost no set of parents are super healthy. Almost no neighborhood, school system, religious system is super healthy. So inevitably things happen and we're affected. And then we spend those formative years coming up with mechanisms that allow us to deal with those things that happen to us, allow us to avoid future infractions. And here we are as adults who now have triggers, who now have reactions, who now have dysregulation, who now have coping mechanisms that don't serve us anymore. And as we just now talked about the things that happened to us and what they led to, how they affected us, now I want to jump into the section where we try to help people see what was going on and see it now when it happens so that they can begin to do something different. And so how to recognize and resist shame-based control. So first you got to see red flags, and they're out there. And so as you're going through your life, I'm going to just ask the audience if you'll start to notice things, and if you can notice them just a tiny bit sooner. If a situation happens that makes you feel smaller, not stronger after an interaction, or you're constantly questioning your own goodness, or you're walking on eggshells or trying to earn love and acceptance. And those are just 3 of the ways that you could notice perhaps shame playing out in your life. But then there's ways to push back against that. So the first thing is you have to notice it, and then you got to figure out what you can do about it. And so the things you can do about it is, 1, you can build shame resilience. We're going to talk about that in the next slide, but this is Brené Brown's model. Another one is you can reclaim language. You can say that's a shame story out loud. And by the way, I said this at the beginning, and I think you'll agree with this. If you're feeling shame in a interaction with a partner, a parent, a friend, the natural inclination is to get around it as fast as possible and get to some other thing, or defend yourself in such a way as to put the blame somewhere else. And that doesn't really, I mean, it served you before, but at some point that doesn't serve you anymore. And if instead you just say out loud, that's a shame story I've got about me. That's a shame story I've got about these things that happen when I do this. And then if you try that once or twice, I'd love to know your feedback, but my hunch is that you'll find that you actually minimize the influence of the shame when you do that, even though it feels like the scariest thing in the world to do or to say. And maybe if you're going to experiment with that, maybe do that the first time or two with someone you trust. I was going to say love, but sometimes we love people who we don't trust. Try it in situations where you trust someone, maybe even whether it's a therapist or a coach or a good friend that you know you can tell your truth to. But say that's a shame story out loud. Another one is to practice radical self-compassion, which is just to grant that you're a human being having a human experience, and it was expected that life would happen in such a way that at certain times during the course of your life, you would feel shame, either because others are intentionally trying to get you to feel shame or because you're just simply embarrassed by the thing that happened. Another is to surround yourself with people who mirror your worth back to you. And the last one here is to reconnect to body cues. Shame is often felt viscerally. A tight chest, a hunched posture. When I saw that, because I agree, and I can think of people who have a hunched posture. I've got a little bit of one. I can think of people who have that. And now in the last couple of years, as I've been made aware that certain things like that show up that way, now when I see old people, and some old people are straight up as can be, but some old people are so hunched over and all they can do is see the ground. And I wonder sometimes, like, what happened to you that you slowly, little by little, just took a hunched over approach to your entire day-to-day life? Anyway, Any thoughts you have on these, and then I'll go into Brené Brown's model specifically.
No, I want to keep going.
Okay, so here, shame spiral. Again, we've talked about that. An event triggers feelings of inadequacy, guilt, embarrassment, feeling you can't do anything right, that you're a failure, thoughts that everyone is judging you, upset with you, dislikes you, gathering evidence that all of your thoughts are true, the urge to quit, isolate, withdraw, run away, anxiety, depression, hopelessness. And eventually, whenever you choose, once you've got the tools and the awareness, you can choose to exit that shame spiral. And it names the things there. Forgive your mistakes. Find the root of the shame. Work on self-talk. Have compassion for yourself. Find a healthy emotional outlet and talk about your feelings. But I did want to talk about Brené Brown's shame resilience theory all by itself. And she gives us 4 steps that we can utilize to get out of that shame cycle, that shame spiral. He says, 1, we can recognize the shame. Notice what it feels like in your body. Hear it in your thoughts. Again, I'll just say, I think this is one of the great things that coaches offer. When you and I sit down with folks, one of the things we're really trying to do is get people to slow down enough that they can feel what's going on internally as things are going on in their head or things are happening to them in the outside world. And so if we can get you to feel it in your body and to hear it in your thoughts, such as I'm not enough, I don't belong, or those feelings that we talked about a few slides ago of like a tight chest or a hunched posture. So the first thing is to recognize it. The second thing is to practice critical awareness. Ask, what story am I telling myself? Or you could, if someone else is telling you a story about who you are, is that story actually true or is it just inherited? Number 3, reach out, share it with someone safe. Empathy kills shame, secrecy feeds it. So you might find yourself in a moment, an experience, an interaction where something was done that you felt shame. And that wasn't the safe place to say anything out loud. But once you get away from that interaction or situation, go find someone who's safe and then share what happened and share specifically that you felt shame around that. Because empathy from others or from yourself towards the thing, it kills shame. And it's when you hide or disassociate or disconnect, that's then that secrecy feeds it. And then the last thing is to speak shame. Name it out loud. Own your experience. Shame can't survive without being spoken and met with compassion. Shame can't survive being spoken and met with compassion. So shame doesn't exist in a space where it's being said out loud and being met with compassion by yourself or by others. And I'll just say here, reminder, shame thrives in silence, secrecy, and judgment. Resilience begins the moment we name it and reach for connection. Your thought?
Yeah, I would say about 70% of what I do in a coaching relationship is offering anti-shame, meeting people, listening to the shame story. And for if it's appropriate or I feel like it's going to resonate or be helpful, I'll share my shame story with a client just to help them know that they're not alone, to normalize it, and to help show them how I walked out of that, so that they have permission to be able to walk out of it and leave it behind, because it's really hard. And what I think is really cool about this time that we're in now is that there are more people talking about this. Brené Brown is incredible. Her work has been amazing. There's so many people who know who she is and who understand more about shame because of her. And so there are more places that we can speak our shame. When I was a teenager and I was going through all of the religion-based shame, there was no one to speak to. And so when you talk about how, empathy kills shame, secrecy feeds it, there was no place to speak it. I think I attempted to speak it once and it wasn't received. There was nothing came back to me, and I learned like, oh, this cannot be spoken of. And so I was held in this prison of shame for over a decade until I actually had a safe space to share it with someone. And so if you are someone who is carrying a shame story and you feel imprisoned by it, you know, just consider what it might be like to release yourself from that burden. And again, this is where you have to be discerning. You really don't want to speak your shame story to everyone. And even sometimes I've heard people share it with a therapist and it wasn't received well. So, get a sense of the people that you are interacting with, and find out, I don't know, find out if they are a highly compassionate person, somebody who speaks with a language where they offer a lot of high empathy, or maybe they already react with messages of anti-shame or compassion or understanding. And then, if you have a moment or an opportunity, share it with someone who you feel you can trust and see what happens.
I like that. There's 2 slides left, and this is the one slide where I want to sort of push back against everything I've said just
Mhm.
a little bit. And it's this idea of why shame can't be discounted completely. Shame isn't just a bad emotion. It evolved as a moral and social signal. When we act in ways that violate our own or a group's ethical code, shame warns us that we're out of alignment and helps us correct course. When experienced in healthy moderation, shame fosters self-awareness, empathy, and integrity. It's a part of what keeps communities functioning and people accountable. The key is that shame becomes destructive when it's chronic, misdirected, or weaponized, which is part of what we talked about earlier with how family systems and spiritual systems use it, but weaponized by others or systems and left unresolved. And I gave 2 examples here. But I want to just note some of the moments where I made the most drastic changes to never, ever find myself in a position again that I found myself in before that I wasn't proud of, was to feel shame. And so I had moments in the past where something happened and I felt like I had compromised my integrity, and I learned that because of the immense amount of feelings of shame around that situation. And so I don't think shame is entirely bad, but I think it is mostly bad, and I think it's misused often by people, systems, to get others to do what they need them to do. And so 2 examples here: ethical accountability in leadership communities. So when a leader or institution behaves in a way that violates its stated values, imagine a public official who lies or abuses power. A collective sense of shame can trigger apology. An apology in and of itself, who knows who gives sincere apologies, who's doing it just to get back in the good graces of whatever. But it also leads to reform or removal of whatever the bad thing was. It can be removal of the person as a leader, but it can also be removal of those types of leadership standards or behaviors. And so in this way, shame acts as social feedback, enforcing trust and integrity. And so it's not so much about making a person feel shame so that they step away. It's about showing all authorities in a system that if they cross certain lines, the system is going to have to deal with the embarrassment of that. The second one here is with children. I think this is even a bigger one: moral development in children and socialization. Shame, in mild, appropriate doses, can help children recognize the impact of their behavior on others, such as, quote, "When you hit that kid, you made them sad," unquote. This recognition of social consequence isn't just guilt, about doing something wrong, but realizing I caused harm in linking behavior, self-reflection, and correction. Shame in this sense helps build empathy and moral responsiveness. So I can think of moments where one of my kids or one of my grandkids did something that caused or could cause someone else to be hurt or sad. And to say to that kid, hey, you did XYZ and that hurt that person and that caused them to be sad. We're going to cause that kid to feel some shame sometimes. In mild doses, again, this isn't just me claiming this is what the research shows, is that it helps kids to develop empathy and understanding for what their choices lead to. And I think we've all been around little children who don't quite comprehend that if they pull the hair or scratch the kid, that it causes some major thing. And I think with young children, from time to time, mild doses of shame are actually shown to lead to the growth that we're actually seeking in the kid to overcome whatever their behavior is. Any thoughts?
Yes. Yeah. So, as long as, again, so the phrase there is, you hit that kid, you made them sad. And that's basically addressing the behavior that the child had. That's not addressing the child themselves. So again, there's reflecting on a child's behavior and letting them know that that behavior is unacceptable and that the behavior can cause ramifications. But you still have to be really careful. I don't think it would ever be healthy to shame a child and tell them that they are inherently wrong or bad, so I think language there is really important.
Yeah. All I'll say there is that, yes, as the adult in the room, we're trying to address behavior. But what I'm saying is that for the kid, there are instances where they feel shame.
Yeah.
And in early child development, that actually leads faster to corrective behavior and better understanding of what it is their behavior caused.
Yeah, for their behavior, not inherently as who they are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. There's that. And then the last thing I wanted to show, and there are lots of books out there on shame. I'm not even going to argue that these are the 3 best books, although I don't think you can ever go wrong with Brené Brown. But when I tried to figure out what material out there was most beneficial to folks studying this topic, these were the 3 books that were at the top of the list. So Healing, The Shame That Binds You by John Bradshaw. I thought it was just me, but it isn't, by Brené Brown. And that one's written specifically to women, but there were many people who commented that the book was helpful for men as well. And then the last one is Shame and Pride, Affect, Sex, and the Birth of Self. Affect, Sex, and the Birth of Self by Donald L. Nathanson. And so those are 3 books if folks do want to follow up this episode by learning more about the impact of shame and understanding how it proliferates through our society and what harm it causes and how we can overcome it. Those are 3 great books, I think, to get the conversation started. Any last comments from you?
No, this is just a far-reaching topic. I think a lot of people, there's nobody, other than sociopaths and narcissists who don't feel shame. But I would even say narcissists actually feel shame. They just are very disconnected from it. But you can't go wrong with any of Brené Brown's work. She has another book called The Gifts of Imperfection, which actually may be the one that you mentioned. She may have changed the name of it. I thought it was Me or something, but I can't remember if that's the same book or not. But anyway, she's got a lot of great work. And just take your time with this. And the most important thing is to just normalize this and recognize that it's a human thing. And to gently and slowly sort of unwind the self-blame and feelings of unworthiness that we have that are connected to shame, and to be able to also understand and trace it back to the systems that we've been a part of, or like whether it's a family system or a religious system or an institutional system of some kind, and be able to recognize like, oh, that was put on me. That's not me. That was because I learned something that was very untrue. And that's where you can start to sort of emancipate yourself from, again, toxic shame in a way that keeps you held captive and in a sort of prison.
Yeah. So, folks, I hope this episode was helpful. And if you do need extra support, please seek out one-on-one coaching, whether it's with us or with a therapist or someone else. Please get the help that you need. And we're grateful for the chance to bring this stuff to you. Please hit like or subscribe. And if you go to almostawakened.org and click the donate button, just $5 or $10 a month is helpful to us keeping these conversations going far into the future. We're really grateful to bring this stuff to you, and we hope that this helps you develop a healthier, happier second half of life. And with that, we'll say good day, and we'll see you for the next episode of the Almost Awakened podcast. Bye-bye.
Thanks for tuning in to the Almost Awakened podcast. For more tools, resources, and real talk about conscious living, visit almostawakened.org. That's almostawakened.org, your resource for waking up